first like 2 to 3 years were an unbelievable roller coaster of events and funding and flying around the world. I've let my school down, I've let my mum down, I've let like my friends down, not that they cared, but just that overwhelming sense of like I'd messed up in some way. It at the time didn't feel great.
Do you feel you're a failure now?
Oh God.
Welcome to AltitudeX, the Business Leaders Podcast, where we explore the untold stories of extraordinary business leaders. I'm Holly, and I'm joined today by Tom Rivers. Tom, now brand director at Speechmatics, is a master storyteller, connecting customers with brands. But his career journey is anything but linear. A decade ago, he founded a startup that shared an incubator with billion-dollar companies like UiPath and Tide. 10 years on, the fast-paced and ever-changing world of startups and scale-ups has helped him hone the skill of building rapport with anyone while still getting things done. Welcome.
Hi, Holly.
So nice to have you here.
It's great to be here.
So what do you think people's first impression will be when they hear that you're speaking on a podcast about failure?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say I hope people would be surprised, but probably not.
Aside from the fact that people maybe don't talk about it that much, what made you want to talk about this in particular?
I think that I have learned, and it's a bit of a cliche, I have learned far more from my failures than any modicum of successes or things going swimmingly. I think a lot of the time when people talk about failure, it seems to always be almost at the place of somebody writing their autobiography or their memoirs, right?
Yeah.
They've been through it, they're 60, 70 years old, they've achieved amazing things and they write about it in retrospect. And I think what that means is when you hear about those failures, you can kind of think, well, it's all right for you to say, like you got through them and like you're way past that and you've gone on to have enormous successes. I think it's in some ways much harder and more interesting to talk about it almost like during that journey rather than at the end.
So you still think you're during the journey?
I'm not retiring anytime soon.
No autobiography, what?
Yeah, not yet. Well, yeah. I don't know if you knew this, but Alan Titchmarsh has, I think, 4 memoirs.
Really?
Not content with one.
Wow.
So maybe I'll just write 4 memoirs.
Oh my God.
One now, one in 10 years, and just keep going. But I mean, we could just change the whole podcast and talk about Alan Titchmarsh if you like. Mind-blowing man.
So we're talking about failure. What was your earliest memory? I know you say you're still mid-journey, but what was your earliest memory of failure?
Yeah. School. So I went to academically a good school. I was fortunate enough to go there on like a scholarship. And they, like lots of academically good schools, kind of pick out students that they think are really good and push them really, really hard, specifically to apply for Oxbridge. And I remember the experience of going to interview at Oxford and it going so badly, just catastrophically badly. I had 2 interviews at 2 different colleges. The second one, I remember them basically being like, look, you've got 20 minutes to get there. It's a half an hour walk. You better get going. Running there, super flustered and just choking. The whole time I was there, I was choked and I didn't get in. And I remember sort of seeing the look in people's eyes where they won't say it.
Yeah.
But you can see in their eyes that they're disappointed in you. That was a very, maybe not earliest, but a very early, vivid memory of feeling like I don't understand what this feels like.
Yeah.
Like I've let my school down, I've let my mum down, I've let like my friends down, not that they cared, but just that overwhelming sense of like I'd messed up in some way.
People say things like, oh, everything happens for a reason. You're moving on to bigger and better things. What if someone had said that to you? Maybe they did at that time.
Yeah, they did. Lots of people. Yeah, I understand the sentiment behind it, right? Again, I always used to have this thing where it was like everybody that says everything happens for a reason or every failure or perceived failure has led me to who I am today. My response to that is, well, you seem pretty chuffed with who you are today. I feel like I could be much better. Like, if those failures hadn't happened, I would be like a greater, smarter, higher achieving version of the person sat opposite you. And I want that. So it wasn't that reassuring at the time. And yeah, lots of people did say everything happens for a reason. I almost just sort of stamped my foot and I was like, yeah, but I don't want it. I want that thing. That's why I went for it. And I tried really hard for it. So it, at the time, didn't feel great. I then had a second failure after that. I was lucky enough to get a full scholarship to London School of Economics, which now is above Oxbridge in the rankings. Dropped out, failed again to complete uni. Had a couple of years out. That was the first time where I kind of reassessed, my priorities in terms of going to like an academically high-flying uni. And instead I was just like, I want to have the best time ever. And I came to Manchester instead. And yeah, relatively shortly afterwards ended up, doing that mad thing of starting a proper startup. So like tech, investor money, Silicon Valley. Well, I wasn't based in Silicon Valley, but that style of startup. And I was, 25.
And how long did that last for?
So that was 7 years.
Yeah.
I would say that it was a tale of two halves though.
Yeah.
The first 2 to 3 years were an unbelievable roller coaster of events and funding and flying around the world and doing all of this exciting, high-paced, action-packed startup stuff, including being on a incubator in London called Camp, which is like one of the world's best. And then it just sort of petered off and a lot of that kind of went away.
Something that must have been very, very difficult. How much would you say it has defined the rest of your life?
Yeah, a huge amount. I think the success of the business becomes utterly entwined with your self-worth.
Yeah.
Your business is you, right? You're obsessed with it. When it's failing, it feels as if you personally are failing. Like you are not good enough, right? But I think it taught me a huge amount of valuable lessons about, when to quit, stuff beyond your control, external factors. Yeah. So there was definitely this, low of feeling absolutely terrible about everything that I touched professionally. But I think over time, when you get a bit of distance and you step away from stuff, that's often only when you can kind of view it clearly. But that took a very, very long time. Because I always think about people's beliefs and what they say. There's like certain stuff that people say, and I think they hold it in their brain, right? So, for example, if you tell people, oh, don't worry what anyone else thinks of you, you'll go, yeah, I know, right? But I think that's your brain saying that. Feeling something, truly believing something, I think takes a lot longer to sink in.
Yeah.
Like you can see people that don't care what other people think, and then you can see people that would agree with you verbally, but don't actually truly believe it like in their bones. Yeah.
That is so interesting. At the time, I'm imagining the answer is yes, but did you feel like you were a failure?
Utterly.
So connected to what to your sense of self. Do you feel you're a failure now?
So it might be worth talking about like what failure means, right?
Tell me what your definition.
Let's get into the good stuff. I think a lot of the time it's just when you don't meet your own or other people's expectations. That's it. You just fall short of that.
Yeah.
It can be your own. I want to run a marathon in 4 hours. I ran it in 4.5. Boom. I still run a marathon, right? Those are your own expectations.
Yeah.
Other people in the world who have never considered running a marathon be like, you're incredible.
Yes.
You got around the distance.
Never ran a marathon. Very impressed.
So that's like the internal ones. But then I think you feel what other people's expectations are as well.
Yeah.
And you internalize those. And sometimes you feel as if you are not living up to other people's expectations. Again, even if they say otherwise, you might be like, no, I know you don't believe that. Your expectations of me were much higher. So have I not hit my own expectations or what I perceive other people's expectations like again and again? Absolutely. Yeah. Time and time and again. Do I now consider myself a failure? No, I don't think so.
There's such a big difference there between meeting your own and meeting other people's expectations. Do you think it's fair to hold yourself to someone else's idea of what is great? Surely that's not fair.
Yeah, I guess not. sometimes people are just driven by different things, right? Some people are very, very driven by other people's expectations. And sometimes that works out fine, right? So Man City Football Club right now, I think most of the players are probably driven by the expectations and drive of Pep, right? They do all right. And if they're just doing it for him, they're still achieving stuff on paper. I think I am much more driven by my own expectations of myself, and I try and set the bar for those as high as possible. But again, it's always a bit of a mix of both. I ask anyone if they don't carry around some sort of baggage of their family's expectations of them. If they say no, I think they're lying, right? It's very rare to meet people that are utterly able to disconnect from other people's expectations of them. And sometimes those expectations aren't terrible, right? People expect you to be polite, nice, kind. That isn't a bad expectation to like internalize and kind of help guide your behavior. But my internal standards and my expectations, and therefore my standards for failure, are, I think, my own. I feel a very strong driving force, and I tend to be, in any work environment, but even any personal one, I'm always the one that beats myself up the most out of anybody else.
So you hold yourself to higher standards then?
Do
you hold yourself to higher standards than you hold other people to?
Yeah, massively, right? But that's similar to that whole thing of like, the way that you talk to yourself is often harsher, right, than you would talk to a friend. Like, if a friend is struggling at work, you are so lovely, right? Everyone is just like, look, it's fine, you'll get through this, don't worry, take that whatever time you need. Your internal monologue is like, pull yourself together, what are you doing? You're an idiot. This isn't even that bad. It's a very similar thing.
It's so hard to make that inner voice inside you positive and not blame yourself, because blame is hard. Blame is hard to wrap your head around. Even now, as a leader, do you find yourself kind of split between, okay, if something goes right, it's praise, if something goes wrong, it's blame? How is that different as a leader?
If every single decision made that didn't lead to huge success you took very, very personally, I just don't think you'd be able to get up and go out the door. And I was thinking about this today, like leading up to this. I was like, I've seen yet another funny meme clip of Liz Truss. So she's at the Conservative Party conference, and she's walking down the corridor, and a Sky News reporter's got a mic in her face, and he's like, Liz, like, how can you even show your face here after the terrible period in charge, and aren't you embarrassed? How can you be giving the advice to like these new Conservatives? And she is just this utterly frozen smile, and she's sort of walking along and trying to ignore him, but it goes on for like a painfully long period of time where she's just like happily walking along smiling. And I watched that and I was kind of like, I get it. Because if Liz Truss truly believed and took responsibility for everything that everyone says she did wrong, she'd die, right? Like if she woke up every morning and was just like screaming like, oh God, what did I do? I'm like the worst prime minister in the history of the country. She would never go outside.
No.
So I think you can see it happening where she's constructing, or like whatever it takes, all of these defense mechanisms to not feel that, right? And I kind of respect that she can, like she can turn up to the Conservative Party conference and want to do a speech about the future of the Conservative Party, because she's been able to like build those defenses and walls that means that to an extent she doesn't have to confront that awfulness. And I think lots of people just do this in their daily lives, right? It's like if you truly accepted all of your failures like head on, you just wouldn't get out of bed ever. So I kind of get it.
Surely there are drawbacks though of that. Surely that has some implication on when you get home and the barriers come down, or
you just scream.
You just scream into your pillow, or sometimes you can say something so many times you can start to believe it. Is that the case?
Yeah, they definitely do. That whole talking to themselves in the mirror, just being like, you're amazing. I don't know what the consequences are, because there's probably consequences if you let your guard down at some point, like come home and scream into your pillow and drink 4 bottles of wine every night. I think some people just never let it in and they just carry on completely unencumbered by, guilt or remorse or like having to confront these things. And some of them do great, I think. Donald Trump seems to be doing all right.
True.
I think if you asked him if he's ever failed, he'd tell you to get out, right? This like just utterly unshakable sense of like, keep going, doesn't matter, haven't made mistakes, on to the next one. And I think that can go either one way. Like, I'm quoting people that are relatively successful. I reckon if you bumped into somebody who utterly refused to accept failure and responsibility, that hadn't had an incredible career, you would just think they were nuts, right?
Yeah.
You'd be like, your life is a shambles, and they're like, no, like you literally, you're living in a cardboard box in a ramshackle place. Like, you should sort yourself out. And I'm like, no, it's fine.
AltitudeX, the Business Leaders Podcast, is brought to you by Peak, the only AI platform for inventory and pricing optimization that delivers real commercial gains. To find out more about Peak and how you can get game-changing AI, visit us at peak.ai. So how much of your failure do you think was your own fault, and how much you blame yourself versus external factors, or, things that the people have done, or things out of your control?
That's a tough one. I still don't really know. It's a big old mix of everything, I think, because it's one of those things where I can't remember who said it, but it's almost possible to make every correct decision and still lose.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, true, yeah.
Like, every time you're faced with, should we do this or this? Should I sell to them or them? Or you can make all of those choices correctly, and it's still just not work out for whatever reason. Timing, market, all this other stuff. Nevertheless, you are the person who was making those choices, and you probably think in your head like, oh, okay, maybe if I didn't make all of those tiny choices right, but instead made a big scary decision to move in a completely different direction earlier, would we have succeeded? And the answer is like, I don't think you can know, right? These counterfactuals can be like super dangerous. I think it's one of those things where I take definitely a huge amount of responsibility for it. But also I think the difference is it was very human, fallible, and okay to make those mistakes, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
okay, yeah.
I still, to some extent, or to a large extent, see it as a personal failing, but that's no big deal, because failure's inevitable and fine.
Yeah. So when you were going through this, what you mentioned before, actually, kind of this sense of self really tied to what you're doing, it's your everything. What happens to the other parts of your sense of self, like home Tom? What happened to home Tom when work Tom was failing?
It's like any sort of spiral that happens, right? It's a weird thing that I think me, along with a lot of other people, sometimes can't be good at compartmentalizing stuff, right? So you're like, well, my work's failing, I'm rubbish at it, I'm also going to be rubbish at all of my hobbies, right? Obviously the two are separate. Yeah. And I think over time, by distancing yourself and your work, you realize that, oh, actually, so I've played football every single Monday for about 10 years with the same group of people whose only connection is a WhatsApp group, right? No one knows each other from school or uni or work. They've just gradually come together and they play Monday night football. I cannot describe how much joy it brings me. It is so they're all between the ages of like 30 and 48, and we just turn up every Monday night and play an hour of football. And that was such the reason why I mention it is we don't even talk about work. No one talks about work. People barely talk about home life. Yeah. They just come together and play football every week. Yeah. And that was such a nice, like, to some extent humbling, right? Because, when I was doing well and playing that, like, Monday night football, nobody asked, nobody cared, right? They didn't read the, TechCrunch or whatever article that had been in. And I knew they didn't care either, right? They wouldn't ask me even if they read it. It was just like, we're there to play football. And I think that's such a nice, like, grounding experience. I know some people talk about the same experience of having dogs or kids. It's being around people or a person or a thing or an animal that just doesn't care what you do for work is so liberating. Because I think you're immediately like, yeah, you know what? This is just great.
Nice, that's good. Keeping yourself resilient and your sense of self strong, that's hard. What would you define as resilience, actually, before I ask you anymore?
Yeah, going from one failure to the next without any loss of enthusiasm, right? I think that was is it Edison or Winston Churchill? I think there is something to that. It's the ability to, no matter how many times you get knocked back, just picking yourself up and going again. But there's different types of resilience, right? And there's that sort of cyclical failure, go again, or like knockback, go again. There's also a resilience which I think I don't have as much as my friends do, which is just to endure misery, right? In the moment, to not give up, right? Rather than give up, pick yourself up and go again, which I think is a nice type of resilience and a good example of it. Some people just have an ability to just endure and to never give up, right? And just go and go and go. So like, forget marathons, like ultra marathon runners, or somebody that's having an awful time at work, but just never quits.
Yeah.
They just hold on, right? Somehow. That's a type of resilience. And I have less of that. But that's also kind of remarkable in a twisted way. I'm not sure if it's healthy necessarily, but some people are particularly good at that. So yeah, maybe 2 definitions there.
I like those definitions. I think that maybe resilience is overall resilience is some blend of the two. But I think when you first move into a leadership role, or you first become a leader, your resilience might not be as strong. And you suddenly are faced with this blame versus praise, and how does that all work? And that can be quite tough. How did you find, do you remember moving into your first leadership role? How did you find it?
I think I was like a teenager experiencing first love. It was like everything just felt world-ending, both good and bad. It
all
was
the
just
highs,
like,
all the lows.
and you were like, I will never feel this amazing ever, or I will never feel this bad ever. And then like 3 days goes by and you're like, oh my God, this is the bottom or this is the top. And you just oscillate between those two things for about a year. And only then are you like, oh, okay. I guess like maybe mixing up sort of resilience and wisdom. Didn't have any wisdom. I maybe had the resilience of just plowing on and doing crazy hours and doing whatever it took. But I didn't have any sort of, or not nearly enough distance to be like, this is fine. This too shall pass. There was none of that. It was just like, it was all the highest highs and the lowest lows for like the first year.
Which makes sense. If your sense of self is wrapped up in it, then you feel all those things so strongly. How do you think you could have, looking back, protected your sense of self a bit more?
God, that is such a tricky question. It's a bit like advising teenagers. If you could go back and advise yourself before you had that terrible idea of a relationship on what to do, that the teenage version of you wouldn't listen anyway, or even if they did, they wouldn't be able to help themselves. I'm not sure I could give any advice that would sink in or would make a difference. It's going to happen, guaranteed. So I guess maybe surround yourself with wise people, or have a good set of friends and family that honestly don't care about what you do for work. Always helpful. Nothing more humbling than your family just absolutely tearing you to shreds for your sweater choice at Christmas, right? Instead of like, oh, how were the results last month, right? Maybe that, but I still don't think it would help.
If surrounding yourself with people who are wise is a helpful thing, but wisdom comes from doing things many times before, surely wisdom, therefore, unless you're succeeding in everything you do, which as humans we're not naturally likely to do, like surely wisdom comes from lots of failure. Yeah,
of course. Absolutely. Well, failures, but just highs and lows, peaks and troughs, weathering storms. Ask any old enough person about politics in the UK or the US, they're usually like, and you're like, no, this could literally be the end of the world. And they're like, yeah, I see.
So do you think failing has made you less ambitious?
Yes. I think so. My key to happiness, I guess, is lowering your expectations completely across everything, friends, family, work, and with that, ambitions to an extent, and focusing more on the day-to-day, the process, the team, and the work you're doing in the moment. I think it sounds really negative, but what it means is if anything great happens, it is a wonderful surprise and not just like an expected outcome. I set my ambitions to, fly to the moon. Did it? Cool. Right? Because your expectations were so high, anything less than landing on the moon is probably going to be a disappointment.
Yeah.
Whereas if you lower them in your ambition and your ambitions too, everything feels great and lucky and fortunate and a wonderful surprise. But I still think there's scope within that kind of thinking to just try and be as good as possible in every moment, in everything that you do, but not fixate on the ambitions and the outcome. It's just be like, I love doing this. I want to be as good as possible. And I want to get better every single day, and then see where that ends up. And it may turn up that, like, despite not having as grand ambitions, that you actually get further. Yeah.
When you look back, do you have any regrets?
See, that's another really interesting one, right? Because it's like that fork in the road thing. Some people, no regrets. It was meant to be, right?
Yeah,
you shouldn't have regrets because you wouldn't be sat here right now. And if you regret anything, you're saying that you're not happy with where you are right now. And part of me sometimes is like, I could have an island somewhere, right? Do I have regrets? Well, I don't have the island or the super yacht. So kind of. Not really. I think one of the important things about maybe is, like, I don't have regrets because I feel proud of how I conducted myself the whole time.
Yeah.
Right? So I didn't, sell my soul to the devil or throw anyone under the bus or do anything horrible, I hope. Maybe I did.
No ethical failures.
Yeah, exactly. It's easier to not have regrets, I think, if you try and have that, strong sense of ethics, and then the sort of practical matters play out how they will. I think the biggest regrets of life often come from deep moral or ethical failings, and they sting a lot more.
Yeah. And my last question.
Okay.
What is the legacy that you'd like to leave behind, personally and professionally?
Legacy. God, that's such a big word. Yes. Nothing spectacular or grand. I don't think I'm going to get people into space or have books written about me or anything like that, and I think that's okay.
You never know.
I think a nice legacy would just be that, on the whole, people just had a fantastic time. I think one of the things I've always wanted to achieve, maybe for one person that works in the same company or team for me, would be to look back at the time we worked together and say, that was the best professional experience I had. Either the work we were doing or the way that we worked together or the dynamic as a team, they are that was the golden era. And that was, for whatever reason, I had an amazing time there. And if I could be a part of that memory in some people's mind, that would be amazing. That would be so lovely. Even if it was something small or insignificant, I think having that beautiful moment where the stars aligned and everyone just seemed to be absolutely flying, and to be there and be a part of that would be great.
I love it. Sounds very wonderful. Well, thank you very much for chatting to me today. It's been so great to talk to you, and it's been great to cover failure because, as you say, sometimes we don't talk about failure enough. It's really important. We all go through it. And so hopefully you've enjoyed it too.
Loved it. Thanks so much, Holly.
Thanks. To find out more about Peak and how you can get game-changing AI, visit us at peak.ai. Make sure you're subscribed to be the first to hear our next episodes. From everyone at Peak, thanks for listening, and catch us next time.